Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to a Climate Emergency Centre Network webinar. And this week we are talking about rivers and the health of the natural environment. And there's been some absolutely incredible work been done by the Henley Mermaids. And this week we were hoping that Robb from the Henley Mermaids, who's a local Green Councillor and things, was going to be coming along. Unfortunately, very sad, she's had a really bad cough develop and feels like she can't present this evening, which is very sad because she's very knowledgeable and has done incredible work to raise awareness of the sewage being pumped out into all of our rivers and turned it into, with a few other brave people, into a national issue for us to realise how much pollution is actually being put out into the rivers and what's going on with the privatised water companies. But luckily, stepping into the breach is David Wallace. Thank you very much, David, for coming. David is from Henley and Marlow River Action, and it's apparently one of his favourite subjects also about rivers, and he worked with them, so he can share some of that knowledge. And we're very glad that you come, David. So thank you for stepping in to substitute and replace. You're most welcome. Over to you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, unfortunately, Jo sounds like she's got a very bad cough. So, but you know, Jo was one of the people, and the Mermaids were one of the people or the peoples which kind of inspired me to kind of get started. So, I'm going to tell a story about like how I've got involved and what I've been doing. Essentially, I'm a resident of Henley. I live in Henley. I used to live near Goring, so you know the area very well, know the river very well, and you know over my sort of adult life, have increasingly been drawn to swimming in the river. So the picture here is of the Henley Mile, which is a fabulous stretch of river. It's the regatta course, but it's just incredibly beautiful piece of river which kind of goes from Henley all the way down to Temple Island. And on one side it's got a SSI with some really rare fauna and flora, and then on the other side it's got all the rowing clubs. But you know, it's just a stunning place, and you know, whether the weather is good or bad, it's always a lovely place to be. So I now need to figure out how oh, there we go. I click on my.
Sure.
So as I say, one of the things that I've been involved in is river swimming, and a couple of years ago I did the Henley to Marlow swim. Now, throughout the time I've swam in rivers, or I was always mindful of things like rainfall. I always thought that, you know, when it rained, stuff would come off fields into the rivers, but you know, that version of me there had no idea about sewage pollution from sewage treatment works. So that was me as I got into the river. And the swim from Henley to Marlow is 14k, so it's a fair old whack, but it again just goes through incredible countryside, beautiful scenery. You know, one of the things that joys about sort of swimming in rivers is the river eye view that you get as you kind of float along. But on this particular day, it was at the end of the summer, that really long hot summer that we had, and you can see the weather's good. It was actually one of the last really beautiful days of that summer. So we'd had temperatures up to 40 degrees. It hadn't rained for weeks. You know, the thing I was most worried about was the lack of flow in the river, because, you know, when you're doing a long distance swim, having flow behind you is a really good thing to kind of push you along. So I was worried about that. But anyway, got in the river, did the swim. But one of the things that I suddenly was aware of as I was sort of heading into Marlow was, actually, I think I'm swimming in poo. You know, I could basically see good old brown stuff all around me. And, you know, I was just like, what's going on? I got out, I wasn't sick, but, you know, was extremely itchy. And, you know, like all good people in this day and age, I did a post on LinkedIn, and most of it was about my grand achievement at swimming such a distance. but also what I did was talked about sewage, and a friend of mine saw the post and he said, "Oh, well, you should connect with a bloke called James Wallace, who's just started a NGO called River Action, and James may be able to kind of shed some light on what was going on." So I connected with James. He's James Wallace. I happen to be David James Wallace. So we had a bit of a laugh about our names. He had been brought up in Reading, lived a life, and so we kind of had shared experience in terms of our younger days. But James came down to see me, and we walked down the Henley Mile, and he explained to me how the water companies, with impunity, were basically putting raw sewage into the rivers. But even when they weren't putting raw sewage into the rivers, they were putting treated sewage into the rivers. And, he said, "I'm not surprised with what you saw, because we know that Henley is a problem area." So he showed me some research that had been done by the Windrush Wasp people. And I think you may have come across the Windrush Wasp, Ash and Peter, because I think they came to Braziers Park when Jo did the talk.
Yeah.
So and they're what they have managed to pull together is incredibly insightful, but is pretty damning. And what I could see was in Henley there was a real problem. So I said to James, "Look, I'm really keen to do something about this. But I'm also very keen to kind of move away from subjective opinion. I want to really understand from a kind of data point of view exactly what is going on." So James was like, "Well, that's perfect, because we want data. So we're going to collect. Would you help us by collecting data on the Henley Mile? And what we want to know is, how polluted is the river?" So that's me and my wife and my big pole. And we went out and we started collecting samples of river water and uploading the data that we were getting onto a mobile app. This was this test here is a very simple test. It's a SETI tube where you can basically fill it with water, and I don't know if you can see what I'm pointing at on yours, but it's actually the plastic tube. It gives you a view as to how clear the water is, and for most of the year, the river in the Thames, the water in the Thames is very clear. And it was one of the things that we learned pretty quickly, is that clear does not mean clean. So just the way it looks is not always a great indicator of the quality of water. And what we got, we then were provided with test kits from Earthwatch. So people may have seen these before, but essentially using sort of powders in these little plastic vials, you're able within a matter of minutes to determine levels of phosphates and nitrates in the river water. And these are really important to kind of understand, because they indicate the ecological health of the river. The Henley Mile that year was not in a good state. So what you can see is the typical readings that we were getting, which were high levels of phosphates and very high levels of nitrates. The nitrates, like the whole of the River Thames is awash with nitrates. So in a way that's not too surprising, but what is surprising was the level of phosphates that we were finding. And the reason that phosphates would exist in the river system is because of farming, but also sewage treatment works. Now, I don't know if people know Henley, but upstream from it is very little farming. So, and that's been corroborated by actually a group called the Watershed Investigates, which are a couple of investigative journalists, have put together a map which maps out farming and pollution and everything across the UK. And we can see from that map that there is very little farming above Henley.
So what was it called, David, that last group?
Watershed Investigates.
Okay.
They're really worth following on any social media. They do great content, but their map is really worth looking at as well.
I'm just putting some of the links in you mentioned into the chat so we can share with others later. Keep going, it's brilliant.
Yeah. So that really got us, wondering what was going on. And just so there's this handy guide which is shows you the levels of pollution, but by phosphates and nitrates. So, what we were seeing was sort of between 2 and 5 for phosphates, and 2 to 5 to 10 on the nitrates, and that basically what shows is the water is very polluted. Now, the impact of phosphates and nitrates is not so much on human health, but it has a massive impact on the ecosystem itself. So what it causes is over nutrification of plants. So it's like having liquid not fertilizer going into the river. So you see a buildup around certain areas of river weeds, and effectively that has sort of is starting to change the dynamic of the river from a kind of an ecosystem point of view. But also what these kind of indicate is that there may be other things lurking in rivers. So there's other studies that have been carried out which show that if you see high levels of phosphates and nitrates, you're likely to see high levels of microplastics and pharmaceuticals and all the other things which tend to come out of sewage treatment works. But I'll also sort of just, I guess, make the point that even now we know very little about the river systems itself. So, I like to say that we probably know more about what's going on Mars than we do about what's going on in the River Thames, basically, because
Wow, that's saying something, isn't it? Incredible.
yeah, very few people have actually taken the time to kind of understand the ecology, the hydrology, and look at the river as a kind of complete living river system. And it's something that, I'd love to do, but just don't have the sort of wherewithal or the scientific background in order to be able to do that. But it's something that I'm talking to the mermaids about. Can we join forces on doing a lot more about understanding our local rivers?
We were hoping to get some people from the Hydrology and Ecology Centre in tonight, but they sent apologies. They had something else up. Maybe we can think in another time.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I'd love to chat to them because, I really feel there is so much we don't know about rivers. We don't know what the impact of pollution has been in the sort of short, medium, and long term on nature. All we know that it is causing catastrophic changes, but we don't know what those catastrophic changes are. And I think there's, in a way, what we've been very successful at doing is focusing on human health. I'd love to do more around kind of the impact on nature itself. So it's interesting. Yeah, it's kind of interesting how little we really do know. So the other thing that we did is we collected samples using a lab-based technique, where we would take a sample, fill a bottle up, and then courier the bottle off to a lab, and we tested the water for enterococci and E. coli. So E. coli and enterococci are indicative of harmful pathogens in the river. The reality is last year we only found high levels on a couple of occasions. And to be honest with you, it was pretty shocking but when we did find high levels, and we were able to correlate the E. coli with then using the EDM map, which I'm sure Rob, Jo may have talked to you about. So
EDM monitors or something's in my
yeah, so there's the Thames Water map. So what we saw was there was an event post rain which happened, which was recorded on the EDM, and then sure enough, a little while later, E. coli slick turned up on the river a bit further down, basically. So it's one of the few occasions where we've kind of been able to correlate rainfall with an EDM event with E. coli.
I think in a talk she was saying something about the water companies were using the excuse that they were allowed to pump out sewage when there was a flooding situation, but they took that as carte blanche to basically pump it out when they wanted.
Yeah. So when there is extreme weather conditions, they're allowed to do this. Yeah, you could argue very strongly that they have just seen that as an excuse, and they do see it as an excuse. And not only do they do this, but occasionally they'll release it without it notifying without the monitors firing. So they're kind of you know, we've got to know through a lot of sleuthing various people within Henley, and we've got to know our little sewage outlets as well. And I kind of come on to that, but one of the things that we've discovered is that they've been using contractors to pump out of holding tanks straight into the river, which will bypass the whole EDM system. So, there are times where the whole system is sort of subverted. So yeah, it's kind of fascinating to sort of understand all of this stuff. But Joe's completely right. And it's it's a massive problem because one of the things that the EDMs do is they just show you the time that the monitor fires. They don't tell you about volumes either. So it's a very distorted picture you kind of get through that. But in fairness, Thames Water have given us the data, and it was thanks to Joe. So Joe was the one who kind of drove all of that. And now all the other water companies are beholden to do it as well.
Tell us a little bit about that. How did Joe push to get that? We got it in the media, created pressure. I mean, we want to know how, some of the methods of how to raise awareness on it.
So she I think applied political pressure. So there's no doubt that we need to kind of work with the various politicians around. I think there was definitely some media pressure. What we've done is we've really we focused on the media first. So on the back of these results, we then launched a big media campaign with River Action. And we got some stunning results. This was last year, and I mean what we've managed to do this year, this kind of pales into insignificance, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there's definitely getting into the media has been a massive I think is a big way of kind of creating pressure on the water companies themselves. Having said that, the water companies are also very cloth-eared, so they are used to dealing with bad PR. So this isn't a sort of simple fix. So we've also then found that we've had to engage with Thames Water. So Joe was actually very good at building relationships with Thames Water, and that's one of the things that we've kind of followed through on is actually building those relationships. We see them as, I think you have to look at them in two ways. One is as a mega big water, effectively a sort of inherently bad company, but within big water exists a bunch of people who work in that company who are not inherently bad. They're trying to do a good job. So we've made great efforts to find those good people, and we kind of work with them. And I think that you will find there's a lot of people in the water companies who wish that they weren't acting in the way that they are, who are incredibly helpful. So I think that was part of what Jo did, is she found a way into the water companies. And
I think that's an important thing, really. I mean, it's something we say, there are many good people within, a lot of organisations who, want to help out, and they're not always, they have concerns about the way things are, within councils, within government, within certain companies and corporations that actually want things to change. So trying to build bridges, and, we're hoping in the future that some of these climate emergency centres can form little teams and go out and do what you've been doing there, measuring. And hopefully, I think the hydrology centre is developing an app that they want a citizen science app kind of thing that people can go out and measure their local river. And we're hoping groups can set up to kind of adopt and support their local river like you guys have done, which is incredible work.
Yeah, no. Well, I think that's exactly what we need, is sort of organisations to give us a broader picture, because at the moment we're kind of like stuck in a bit of a silo in terms of Henley. So, you know, what we've seen with Henley is a very sick bit of river, but it also has it has major events like the regatta. So, you know, we've used that to the biggest effect that we possibly can. And then what we've done is we've actually, you know, taking a leaf out of Jo's book, is we've engaged with the politicians. So, you know, in the run up to the election, I made sure that the effectively the candidates who were likely to be the sort of final two or final three, you know, I courted them, I took them river testing, you know, and now Freddie Van Merlier, who is our local MP, I met with him a week ago because, you know, he's very keen to kind of help drive a clean water agenda. And I'm like, well, Freddie, you know, you could make your career out of this, because Henley is a slam dunk for kind of doing all of this. So, you know, we've then sort of decided that the political angle is kind of critical. So one of the other things that then has happened is, as people have heard about what we're up to, I've been contacted. And essentially, I've been sponsored by both River Action and Earthwatch. You know, we're talking a few £100, nothing more than that. And I've been able to get groups testing the river from essentially all the way from kind of Maidenhead up to Sonning. So we have a broader view of the river. And most of that is using these phosphates and nitrate test kits. They're a great way to get.
So there's a centre that's opened up in Maidenhead and Windsor, Climate Emergency Centre. They said come and visit. I haven't been there yet, but be good to link you up with them. Maybe they
Yeah,
could.
no. Well, I'd be delighted to. So before the summer, I was out training a group of scouts from Windsor about all of this stuff. So, you know, it's one of the things that I'm keen to do, is to broaden our appeal, meet other people. So, you know, one of the things we're struggling with a bit is funding, but you know, we can kind of come back to that, because maybe you've got some ideas for me. But you know, there's definitely appetite. So, like in a week's time, I'm off to Putney to talk to the rowing club there about what we're up to. So I've been supporting Maidenhead and Marlow Rowing Club. And you know, what's been great is people have just got involved in this. And the more you kind of get involved, the more you begin to understand like what needs to be done, basically. There's no substitute for sort of hands-on experience. So just going back to Henley, so where I'm pointing now is the Henley sewage treatment works. And what we discovered is that the outflow from the sewage treatment works follows this river course and then spreads out along the whole of the Henley Mile. So unfortunately for Henley, we are being, like, the outflow, the bad water from the sewage treatment works is spread all along the mile. So we then had this very wet winter, and the Henley sewage treatment works had a lot of problems, and we got sort of, we've had 950 hours worth of spills from Henley sewage treatment works. I mean, I asked Thames Water what was going on, and they basically said rather depressingly that and then they retracted it. But, you know, I think that what they said was true, is at this point here, there's a pumping station, and sometimes that just pumps straight into the river. But this was flooded, and there was river water getting into the pump, and they were pumping that to the sewage treatment works, and basically it inundated the sewage because their equipment was faulty and it was all wrong. And that, you know, it's actually so much of Thames Water's assets are suboptimal, subpar, just don't work, and are causing problems, basically. So that was a real kind of lesson for us in terms of actually engaging with Thames Water when you actually go and visit their assets. And I'd really encourage people to reach out to, I don't know, your local MP or somebody, and just say, look, you know, your local council, say, I want to go to a sewage treatment work, go and have a tour. You know, Thames will put them on. and
Wow.
understand what is going on, you know. So yeah, I've been around Henley a few times, Little Marlow, and it's a really good way to understand the what we're kind of dealing with. So this map here is when it eventually turns up. There's something still loading in the background, I think. But basically, through Freedom of Information Acts, you can get all sorts of things. So what it doesn't show, which is a real pain, because it's. But basically, what this is a map of all the sewage, and all the drains, everything in Henley. And what it then indicates is where it kind of goes into the river. We can then take rough guesses as to where there's problem points. So here's a great example where this has nothing to do with Thames Water, but this island here, you've got all these houses. They're not on main sewage. They all have septic tanks. I think there's a very good chance that a lot of these septic tanks are old and just leaking into the river. And that is causing problems in this stretch of river. But, you know, again, I'm not a hydrologist, I'm not a scientist. That's just something that I've kind of thought of. But you know, it's like all of this stuff is we're spending a lot of time just getting to know what we're dealing with in terms of our local sewage. All of this is available through Freedom of Information Act. So, you know, they cannot hold this data back. So you have to apply. Sometimes they drag their feet. And you know, going back to this, we'd come up with this hypothesis that sewage was leaking into the Henley Mile through all of these streams. And we put that to Thames Water, and Thames Water said, oh, we don't know anything about the hydrology. And, you know, that's not. So we then, bizarrely, they sent us this map, and we were able to send it back to them and go, well, you do know because you've mapped it all. So they were like, oh, yeah, sorry.
You got us there. Did you mentioned about freedom of information requests? What some of the things we do in networks try and accelerate people being able to do things easier. Is there copies of freedom of information requests that another group in another town near another river could copy and paste and send in for a freedom of information about what's going on?
Yeah, definitely. So
Right.
it's a shame because actually I work with another chap called Chris who he does all the EIR requests. But essentially you can go to Thames Water and you can just say, look, I want an EIR. I want you can and I can finish. I don't have it to hand, I'm afraid, but I can definitely get you the kind of information. But yeah, I mean it's sort of like the problem you have is I think sometimes just getting too much information. So it's been kind of selective about it as well. But it's definitely the data is there. And it's one of the things that the Windrush Wasp people have been brilliant at is using the data that the water companies have themselves against them. So yeah, I'll definitely, if I forget, just feel free to remind me at some point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one of the things that I've been trying to think about is, well, how do you kind of educate people around this problem? And we've done some work with British Rowing, and I just thought, you know, I'll try and bring the problem to life a bit more. So, you know, I've come up with this idea of sort of 7 numbers. So here's Henley, the regatta. We've done some testing with Thames Water actually through the sewage treatment process. So they, you know, in fairness to them, they've actually let us, they've done the testing, they've shown us, shared the results, but essentially raw sewage will go into the sewage treatment works with an E. coli count of 30 million. So the MPN is basically, that's 30 million E. coli. MPN stands for most probable number, and it's to do with what they can count from the way they kind of take samples and grow samples. But 30 million is the number that goes into a sewage treatment works.
Wow, staggering.
160,000 is what comes out the other end. So we did a test ourselves of, this is their number. We did a test ourselves of Pangbourne and found 100,000. So in one of our tests, just the day before the regatta started, we found 5,229 E. coli. The safe limit is 900. So I should have probably started with that because that's the magic number. So anything above 900 is deemed unsatisfactory, unsafe, poor quality. So 5,000 in the river, 160,000 in the outflow, and 3 million going into the sewage treatment works.
Wow.
So
wow.
what we decided to do this year was to focus a lot more in E. coli. So we know that there's problems, phosphate and nitrate problems. So we actually invested in one of these things. It's called a fluidian. And basically what this gives you is E. coli results in a matter of hours, rather than using lab-based techniques, which can take sort of days or even weeks sometimes. Sorry, my dog is barking at something on.
All right, we can't hear it this end, but
that's all right. She's a mad one. The owls locally tease her. So so the reason we've decided to focus on E. coli was because we feel that E. coli was a real way to kind of the best way possible to illustrate the impact on, or the potential impact on, people's health. The media are interested in this essentially. Actually, they're not that interested in the ecology of the river. Now, I think they should be, but you know, it's not headline news, whereas rowers getting ill is headline news. So we did a bunch of testing across the summer using these fluidian devices. Gave us a lot of power. I mean, they're very expensive. So I bought this one. It was £3,000. The tests themselves like £15 each. But you know, we got some funding, some support from River Action around this. But actually, what we found, you know, was very high levels of E. coli, and that much higher than last year. And we think that the wet weather has had a massive impact on how the sewage treatment works are working, but also it's given the E. coli opportunities to kind of get footholds in the river. So normally, you know, the E. coli just gets swept down, but you know, those little streams I was talking about, we think that they've sort of, the E. coli's kind of got a real foothold in there. And actually what we've done is we've got a few of these machines. We've worked with the manufacturer based out of Paris. So they've been doing a lot of the river testing on the River Seine in the Olympics. And you know, I'm not going to go into the kind of details on this, but you know, we've been doing filtered and unfiltered samples. But what this enables us to do is to respond very quickly and do tests and find out sort of levels of E. coli. So tomorrow we've got a triathlon event which is happening, and they want us to do a sample. So we're going off to do that. A couple of weeks ago, Steve Backshall was going to be on the TV, but he asked if I could do a test. So you know, I went to his house, got a sample, did a test, and then you know, he was able to go on TV and talk about the levels. So you know, I insisted he took the machine with him so that you know, people could see that this is what was used to kind of do this. But you know, we then got a very powerful piece on Good Morning Britain with Steve Backshall saying this was the level of E. coli, this is the problem, you know, and it's a it's sort of almost we've kind of weaponized all of this but you know, in a way that we believe is kind of it is great for raising awareness and helping to educate people.
It's interesting you mentioned France there, because I think Jo mentioned something in her original lecture about model for good rivers, something about the EU had a clean bathing water kind of level, and they set up some kind of Paris public ownership of water called Eau de Paris, and swimming was returning to Paris. And I think, what are later on, maybe if you could say something about where we could head to, what the solutions are. Apparently, the mayor of London has said he'd like the Thames to be re-swimmable by 2030 or whatever. And there were some good news stories like the rivers in Wales had cleaned up after industrialisation. And one of the good bits of news. How can we move to a better scenario would be one of the questions for later, David. But keep going.
Yeah, no. So I've actually almost finished. So I mean, it's a really good question. I know that this is my last slide. This is like taken from Marsh Lock. The reason I put this here is because this is the bit of river, like it should be swimmable, but this is a very sick bit of river. For whatever reason at Marsh Lock, we have very high levels of E. coli. We've done testing, Thames Water have done testing, we've high levels. Now, the question is why? What is going on here? Because until we find out why, we cannot kind of move the dial in terms of finding solutions. My view is that the rivers should be free of E. coli or E. coli coming out of sewage treatment works. We should do everything we can to kind of make them as accessible from a kind of recreational point of view as we can. And in order to do that, we need to do a number of things. One is the regulators need to up their game in terms of actually answering the question of what's going on. So I want to know what's going on in Henley. Our next move is to go to the Environment Agency and say, well, look, you need to investigate this. This is where getting like your local MP on board. I've said to Freddie, you need to start asking questions in the House about why is the river in such a bad state in Henley. We have the data which can back up that. And it's not just us, it's also Thames Water. Their own data kind of shows this. So what that then does is it feeds into a broader narrative around permitting. Like at the moment, the water companies are allowed pretty much with impunity to pump anything they want into the river. As long, I mean, it's like most of these permits were sort of Thatcher era, 1980s, sort of early 90s, when in essence the European Union was sort of starting to have an impact on kind of regulation, and people just didn't worry about the permits because the EU sort of law, I think, took precedent. But these permits exist, and they mean that the companies don't have to, by law, clean up the water that's going out. They don't have to do tertiary treatment. That needs to change. So one of the things, like this march we're going on in London, one of the things we want is to make sure that the government is under no illusions that that is an area that we kind of need to change. We need emblematic places to show what that means, because for most people, this is sort of like just goes over their head. They don't even understand it. And I think Henley is a great sort of showcase for this, because it's so bad, but it's also the most used bit of river on the Thames, so we've kind of in a good place. So I'm going to stop sharing. Okay, stop sharing.
Okay.
So but yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. I think, the other thing that we are, I mean, I'm hoping to embark on is comparing like what our sewage treatment works are like with a good sewage treatment work. So, how come the people of Zurich can swim in the river which goes through the middle of their city? Is it because they're all hardier, or is their water cleaner? Is there local sewage treatment works, which is probably pouring effluent, treated effluent into their rivers? Is that treated to a higher standard than ours? So I think it's one of the jobs we're trying to do is to start saying, well, what does good look like? What does it mean? what we've then got is people approaching us with, we've got ideas for how to clean up water as well. So how can we connect those people to the water companies? Because, you know, we're sort of like, yeah, exactly. Again, I'm not a scientist by background or anything like that. I'm just a bloke called Dave who lives in Henley, who has decided this needs to kind of change, to be honest with you.
Maximum respect, actually, if you're more beaming in for tail ends and things like that. You know, really incredible work you're doing there, David. Maximum respect, and for all the Henley team, you've actually highlighted it for the nation, really. And when I heard Jo talk, just to share a couple of bits. Well, welcome a few to Mary Ellen, Beeman and Hilmy and Christine. Nice to see you guys. David's been telling us about, you know, what's been going on with the rivers. Unfortunately, Jo was ill this week with a very bad cough, couldn't make it. But David's been doing a lot of similar work. Has done a very incredible presentation now. Hi, Christine. So, you know, it really is phenomenal. You know, what has happened there is basically a citizen story where you guys have gone and, you know, tested the rivers. I think what Jo was saying was there was an investigative an ex-policeman and a scientist who got together and they started collecting the data and then kind of broke it to a national story. But if there's any questions or feedback or comments there or any clarifications, Deborah, I know you're on. Habiba, do you want to go for one there? You have to unmute.
Work for an agency. I used to work for an agency in Farringdon. Do you know the EIA, the Environmental Investigation Agency? It's not a government one. It's, you know, so you could.
Yes. Okay, that would be a good one. I don't know whether the Environmental Investigation Agency. I'll put a link in. A wizard is always perfectly on time, Mary Ellen. It's lovely to see you always. And Deepak, Environmental Impact Investigation Agency would be a good one to get on board. Surface Against Sewage, I think, as well, has done a lot of.
Definitely. Surface Against Sewage are very active actually on the Thames. So they are supporting a bunch of people with E. coli testing with a view that that will feed into the broader narrative about bathing quality status sites. So I think Jo probably talked to you about Wallingford and Hangbourne, I think, is in the pipeline. But these are areas where, you know, there is a duty of care to upgrade sewage treatment works from a kind of recreational point of view, but also to do regular testing so people know what's going on in the water.
So, yeah, I mean, that's what we need, really. So just saying, else, there's a reactions tab down the bottom. If you want to make a comment or anything, raise your hand, stick something up there like that. There is, I think it's really, what we're really hoping for is that a couple of people from each different climate emergency centre would form a little river support team. So, you know, I know Guildford did some river cleanups. So, for example, the Seaford group, they're an old NatWest bank, they did beach cleanups and things like that. But if there's a hydrology and ecology centre, unfortunately Simon couldn't come tonight. He's staying where I live, and he works with the hydrology ecology centre. But I'll try and link them up with you with better, David. And the idea,
that would be fabulous if you could.
Definitely. You know, I'll send you each other's numbers. They're trying to develop, hopefully, I don't know, in the next so many months, a citizens science app that anybody on their smartphone can start to take measurements and test things. And if we can get a clearer picture of what's really going on from Jo's talk, really, it's been horrific. Since they privatized it, it was something like 60 million or billion in 60 million in dividends for the shareholders.
72 billion has gone offshore.
Yeah.
So when they say they don't have any money, you know, it's very galling, to be honest with you.
Totally, yeah. Mary Ellen, you've got her hand up there. Lovely to see you always.
Sorry for my late arrival, and thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry I've missed your talk, David. But I was just wondering, if disability is on the agenda when we're thinking about water and clean water and the effects of flooding, etc. Because as Neil Goodwin pointed out, disabled people can't run from floods, and they're more vulnerable in from the point of view of health conditions that affect immunity. So if there is contamination in the water, that leaves disabled people more prone to infection and more prone to death as a result as well. I don't know if you've seen the latest reports that came from UCL, which shows that over 1 million people have died prematurely as a result of austerity and poverty. And that's not just disabled people, just in general, over 1 million people have died, but most of them are disabled people and people who are elderly and children who are more vulnerable because of poverty. And it's just mind-blowing that over 1 million people can die prematurely in this country, and it's not in the news even. So when it comes to every crisis, whether it's a scandal, if you look at the intersectionality of it all, people who've got disabled children, disabled elderly, disabled themselves, are being hit first and hardest by it. So and a lot of disabled people can't go out, don't have the means with which to be measuring the water, etc. And we need to bear in mind that and see what we can do to help groups like DPAC to actually be more involved in supporting more disabled people and fighting for their right to clean water.
I think it's a really good point. I'll have to confess it's not something I've thought a lot about, but I think now you've talked about it, it's something that I'd really think a lot about, because you're absolutely right. I mean, what we're seeing is very healthy people getting, just rowers and young people getting very ill from just touching contaminated water. So, more vulnerable people. I mean, it's actually one of the reasons I've stopped swimming in the river is because I've got an underlying condition, which if I got a bad E. coli infection could have sort of devastating consequences. So, it's something I'll have a look at. I'll have a look at the UCL.
Yeah. And it's not our disabilities or health conditions that make us vulnerable. It is the contamination of the water, is the government's policies. That makes us vulnerable to these conditions and increases our chances of being pushed into early graves.
I think it's really, I mean, you make a really relevant point there. It's, some of the most vulnerable communities and people are, on the front lines of dealing with climate change. When it does flood, it's harder to get away and, and deal with lots of different things. I mean, there was so much originally brought up within Jo's talk. So just to put a few bits in there, I was really, really impressed by Jo's talk. It just starts with, she put it, some, kind of middle-aged, middle-class, friends just going and swimming in the river while swimming. And then they started noticing the raw sewage floating past them. And from that, then gradually working out that, they could test for it. And there was a guy who came to the talk who's an ex-policeman, and he applied the investigative skills to it. And there was another guy, just a guy on his own, who was a scientist who was doing the things. And those three linked up and got some hard data that they then started to put into the political realm, into the media realm. And suddenly it became a national story when they started to realise that because they privatised so much of all the water companies, they sold off all the assets, they sold off different treatment plants, bits of land, anything they could get hands on. Big Australian company was one of them, apparently. And they cut so many corners that they're just, you know, they're pumping it straight out into the rivers, you know, and just, you know, they're breaking the law in several situations, and certain things they're allowed to do, or they've just pushed a grey area, you know. But on the hopeful end, because we do like to talk about solutions here, we're coming towards the tail end of times, and, you know, really fascinating, you know, information and important information here for the rivers and nature. I mean, one of the talks we had earlier was something about rivers have rights. I think in New Zealand, Canada, they've given rights of personhood, like they've given to companies, to rivers. They have a right to not be polluted and other things. From Joe Shot, the mayor, Sadiq Khan wants the Thames swimmable by 2035. Don't know whether that will happen, but there is groups, you know, Paris had a model for clearing them up, and the EU had this thing of clean beach swimming areas. Within 3 miles of that swimming area, 5 miles, 10 miles, whatever, you couldn't pump out and pollute. So we do need to look at what's working. And your example there, Dave, of Switzerland, we do need to see what is working in other countries and start to apply and push for it to happen here. You know, maybe the public ownership of certain, you know, certain facilities, you know. Dave, we're coming towards the tail end of it, and I thank you so much for coming and sharing all that info and
my pleasure.
Your heroic work in Henley to raise awareness of this. And hopefully this is the beginning of something. We can keep this theme going. Joe could come back another time, and we'll do another one when we've done some more groundwork to get some citizen science teams together and info out to different groups, and maybe some of the centres can help monitor and stuff. But do you want to? I'll come back to you, Dave, for sort of final words or anything you want to share. And
no, look, I think it's you know, it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. So thank you for listening, and I hope it was sort of coherent and kind of followed on nicely from what Joe had said. I think there's no substitute for, you know, actually you don't even need to go and test. You can go and have a look at your river and do plastic, you know, litter picking, and just getting to know your river really well, I think is a phenomenal thing. It's good for your kind of mental health, but it's also, you know, a really good way of kind of understanding that the rivers need voices, you know. So you know, I'd encourage people to sort of, you know, go and spend time by your local river, basically, and get to know it.
Thank you very much for those passing words. And I just have to say thank you after you said that, to being the voice of the voiceless. One of the suggestions in the upgrade democracy thing for community assemblies was that there was a voice for the animals and the rivers and nature, and we have to speak up. So thank you for being a river champion and speaking up for the river, David. That's incredible, and Joe and all of the team there. All right, lovely job. I'm going to stop the recording just there, but thank you to everyone who's beamed in there tonight and shared, and really interesting. Oh, Barry's just appeared, tail end there, beaming in as well. I'll stop the recording. If anyone wants to chat after